I will talk to you about Change Your World, the book that just came out, but understand I'm an author, but I'm also a leader. And so I'm going to give you an example of that. When I write books, of course, people pick up and they read my books. But I write books from a leadership perspective, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean here. So we're going to go two tracks for the next 35, 40 minutes. We're going to go on a book track of I'll share with you kind of what Change Your World's all about. But we're also going to go on a leaders track. And I'm going to talk to you about how when you write or when you speak, you always connect from a leadership perspective. And let me give you an example of that, okay? Change Your World. The title is very empowering. Oh my gosh, I get to change my world. So when I write the book as a leader, I ask myself, okay, how do I equip people and how do I empower people? And I came to the conclusion that there are 9 things that have to happen to equip and empower people in your business, okay? This works for you wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you're equipping and empowering people, the 9 things I'm going to share with you will help you equip and empower you. Now, because I'm a leader, when I write this book, I'm an author leader or a leader author. My 9 chapters are the 9 things that you need to equip people. So what I almost always have is a leadership story inside of my book. And in fact, I'm trying to think, Sarah. I was with a small group of major leaders recently, and I sat down with them and I shared a little bit of what I'm going to share, not as extensive as I'm going to share with you now. I've never shared this, so this isn't like a sugar stick, but I'm going to give you an overview of the book. It'll be a little choppy because I'm just wanting to get like highlights. But what I want you to catch is the fact that the 9 chapters of the book are the 9 things you need to do to equip and empower people. So let's get going. The best way I would, if I was taking notes where you, I would kind of start this off. To change our world, we must have ... Okay? That's kind of like the heading. To change our world, we must ... have. Okay, what do you have to have? Number 1, to change your world, to change my world, we have to have a passion that stirs us. And I begin with passion because passion is the great motivator. When people are passionate about something, you don't need to motivate. Let's put it this way. You never have to motivate a passionate person. If somebody's passionate about the business, you don't have to wake them up and say, could you get out of bed and kind of, do your thing now. Passion energizes people. So in equipping and empowering, if we're going to change our world, we really have to have a passion that stirs us. So my first chapter is entitled, We Can't Wait for Change. Now, you see, that's a passion phrase. We can't wait for change. In chapter 1, I quote Augustine of Hippo, and I use this quote because it's so powerful. Hope has 2 beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, courage to see that they do not remain as they are. And what I'm doing in this first chapter is I'm making sure that the reader has a passion and energy for what I'm about to share. In fact, I'm really upfront here, and I say, Change Your World was written for you if you want to change your world. And if you want to have your own life changed. And I really talk about the fact that this is going to be this is for a certain kind of person. This is not for the person who says, I want you to motivate me to change my world. This is for the person who says, I'm already motivated. I just need somebody to give me direction. And so chapter 1 is all about how do I have hope? How do I have hope for myself? How do I have hope for others? Because again, when you have hope, there's a passion that you have. I've never known anybody that had hope that lacked energy and passion. They go together. Just like a loss of hope has the opposite negative effect. So I talk in chapter 1 about the difference between optimism and hope. And I think this is huge because I think, again, in your business, there's an awful lot of optimism and there's not near as much hope. For example, optimism is kind of like a belief that things can be done, that things can be accomplished. A belief that, well, things can get better. I can reach my dream. It's a belief. But hope is a faith. And belief says things can get better, where faith says I can make things better. There is an action that faith requires that belief doesn't require. Let me put it this way. Optimism is a passive virtue, and hope is an active virtue. Optimism really takes no courage, takes no commitment. Hope takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of commitment. And so chapter 1, I really kind of, you know what I try to do in chapter 1? I try to separate the players from the pretenders. And I do that often. In fact, maybe this is a little leadership teaching point just for a moment, Sarah. When I cast vision, you know, I hear all the time people say, well, vision unites people. And I want to say to them that that's not necessarily true. Vision also separates people. And I don't cast vision to unite people. I honestly cast vision to separate them. I've got to figure out who the players are from the pretenders. And here's why. If I'm going to lead people, I got to lead people that want to be led and that want to go. And nothing is more tiring and time-consuming than trying to lead people who don't really want to go. And so the quickest thing I can do as a leader is to separate the players from the pretenders and say, okay, I'm going to work with the players. And that's why, as you know, Sarah, I teach all the time that I unconditionally love all of you as my team, but you have to earn my time. And you will not earn my time by being on my team. Just because you're on my team doesn't mean you earn my time. You have to be on my team, but you have to earn my time through production. And I've got to see you want it worse than I want it. You got to bet on yourself before I bet on you. When people says, well, I need a sponsor, or, you don't need a sponsor. Sponsor yourself. Why should I give you my time or my money or whatever if you haven't proven that you're deserving of it? So chapter 1 is to empower people. You really got to make sure that they really want to be empowered, that they want to be passionate. So that's chapter 1. Okay. Go to chapter 2. To change our world, we must have, secondly, a transformation that changes us. In other words, chapter 2 is entitled Become a Catalyst for Change. And how do I become a catalyst for change? I become a catalyst for change by the fact that I have been changed. Don't miss this. You cannot give what you do not have. And there's nothing worse than people trying to sell things that hasn't changed their life. In fact, I was just speaking Friday in Orlando to, we have 7 companies, okay, in the John Maxwell Enterprise. And so I was talking to the salespeople of all of our companies. And I shared with them that I've never sold anything in my life. I don't do sales. I have just all my life added value to people. So I never come into your life saying, I want to sell you something. I really come into your life and say, I would like to add value to you. Now, let me explain something to you. You can't add value to others if it hasn't added value to you. And so there are a lot of people that are vision casters, but they're not vision carriers. And you've got to live this to have the authenticity to sell it.
He said, with so much pain and distrust and tension in our society right now, how do we navigate long-lasting transformational change? John?
Well, a couple of things. It's a great question. Let's talk about trust. Let's just talk about trust. In fact, I think there are 3 questions that all followers ask of a leader. And the 3 questions are, do you like me? Can you help me? And can I trust you? And I think those are three very valid questions. I mean, who wants to follow a leader that doesn't like them? Because the first thing they'll do is they'll manipulate you and move you for their advantage. Who wants to follow a leader that's incompetent? Hello, you're not going to get where you want to go with that. But this issue of trust, and so what I say to myself all the time is, that's not the question followers should be asking me. That's the question I should be asking myself. It goes back to what Simon was saying again. When the quote system is broken, we're the system. Hey, wait a minute. Quit looking for someone else to bail us out, lead us up. Let's look at ourselves and say, what am I doing? How do I get involved? How do I improve myself? How do I get better? So every day I'm asking myself that question. Do I really love the people that I lead? Because honestly, if I don't love them, I ought to get out of the leadership game. I mean, is there anything worse than a leader that doesn't love his or her people? I mean, and care for them? So and if I'm incompetent, I ought to get out of the leadership game, or that's for sure, or learn how to lead. But this whole issue of trust, am I a trustworthy person? Am I a person? And there's a huge responsibility on trustworthiness. Pat Lencioni has this new book out. I think it's called Motives. And he basically asked, why do leaders lead? And he said there's two reasons. They either lead for reward, in other words, what's in it for me, or they lead for responsibility, which responsibility is heavy. When you sign up for leadership, this is not an easy course. And responsibility means I'm my brother's keeper, and those people are first. And so I think when you talk about something that's long lasting, not a quick fix, those are three questions we just need to ask ourselves, and forget about the followers asking. In fact, let me just say one thing. The moment the follower has to ask the question you're not asking yourself, you're already behind. And so, get out in front and ask the questions first, and set the bar of excellence for yourself before somebody else has to set it for you. Go ahead, Simon.
I like to think of things when people ask societal questions. How do we restore trust? How do we build trust? I always like to think of these things in much smaller, more understandable context. I think of interpersonal relationships, right?
Correct.
How do we build trust with one person? We all know how to do that. Sometimes it's quicker and sometimes it's slower, but it's not immediate. It takes time and it takes reinforcement. And what happens if you violate trust? Like, what happens if you do something that violates the trust of a friend, of somebody who you care about and who cares about you, and they say to you, how can I trust you? And simply doing what you used to do, or simply promising that you can still trust me, I made a mistake. Even if you come clean and say, I made a mistake, there still needs to be, now you got to double down on working even harder. And that, and you got to prove it, and you've got to, and one of the things I can't stand is leaders who say, prove to me why I should trust you. Leaders have to take the risk of trust the day they show up. If you declare yourself a leader, you take the risk of trust. It's the opposite. It's the leaders who have to prove why they're trustworthy to their people.
That's right. Yes.
We get the equation backwards all the time. Leaders take the risk to trust, but the rest of us, you got to earn our trust.
That's why,
Simon,
that's why I love the quote. It's wonderful when the people trust the leader, but it's even more wonderful when the leader trusts the people.
And trust is a risk. It's like love is a risk. Like, you didn't get to choose your children. You love them, right? I didn't get to choose my team. Tough. You got to trust them. Like, you got to love them too.
Yeah.
And if they fail, you don't immediately assume that there's something wrong with them. You go and again, we'll go back to what we said before. You lead with empathy. Are you okay? What's going on? We don't know what their history is. We don't know who their former boss was. We don't know. Maybe they've come from a horrible corporate culture and they've just joined your company and they don't trust anybody. And so they're going to operate to protect themselves. We don't know. And that goes back to those listening skills. I think, just think of it as interpersonal, and how we as individuals would have to act to build trust with another human being, and now amplify that. And you'll see how institutions have to act in a way to rebuild trust with populations as well.
I love that way of communicating and teaching, Simon. It just simplifies everything when you forget about the corporations and the teams, and you just break it down to a one-on-one relationship and say, how's this going to work? And because how it works in one-on-one is how it works with everyone.
Turns out organizations and societies are just collections of individuals.
That's correct.
And individuals, if you can understand the individual, you can understand the society, because societies act the same way as individuals.
That's exactly right.
It's true. It's true for companies. It's true for countries. It's true for where we are now. Welcome back. I know if you're like me and Becky, we're sitting here wishing John would keep inspiring us to inspire change. There's a lot of change, Becky, that you and I are getting to lead through. We're getting to be defined in our leadership because some of the changes. I'm reminded of Socrates' quote that says, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." It's what John says. He says change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And Becky, a year ago, you and I, we sat down with each other and we said, you know what? The old is pretty good. Yesterday was really good. But boy, there is a brightness that's pulling us into the future. And have we not experienced some change over the last year?
We definitely have. And it's been quite a ride, and it's still quite a ride. I think it's amazing how we all get excited about change, talking about it. But then when it comes time to implement it, we find there's a few problems that we don't get excited about. And when you think of tackling these things, especially with change, why do you think we, as a leadership organization or any organization, why do you think it's so hard for us to actually move forward with that? I mean, I think myself in particular, it's easy to want to put off the hard things and want to tackle the easy things first.
Well, it's this thing that John talks about. Number one, change what needs to be changed, not what's easy. And we were talking right before we went live here, Becky, we were talking about this idea that for all of us, if you're a task person, and I'm not saying that I am or am not a task person, but I will tell you, I like to check some things off. I got my little boxes and I like to check them off. And so maybe that makes me a task person, but I think everybody likes a sense of accomplishment. I got that done. Let me move on to the next thing. And it's true that whether it's John or any of us that are teaching, we challenge people, don't get caught up in the trap of checking off the easy things and leaving to the last minute the most difficult things. And we say that a lot in responsibility or daily task. In change, it's even more of a warning that I want to sound, because if you try to change what's easy, you will never get to what's hard. Because there's easy changes all around. We've got to work hard to get the changes that require the most energy, the changes that need to be done. We've got to really do a good job, Becky, in my opinion, to intentionally beginning to build that out so that we can have the most energy to make those changes, no matter the difficulty of the task. It's about the importance or the priority of the task that we need to work toward, and when it comes to change.
It's true. And I love how he references the difference between a cosmetic change and a cultural change, because we're kind of living in that right now. We had this beautiful cosmetic change of everything from branding to logos. And as much as we thought that was going to be the hard part, that's not the hard part. Like, that's actually the fun, beautiful part. When it came time to actually culturally embrace those things, even changing the language that we use. I think you and I are still getting used to some of the change in the cultural side.
Well, it is. And it's true. I made a miscalculation as a leader in 2021. So in 2020, we all led through COVID and we really didn't know what we were doing. And most of us, we circled the wagons and we back to back, we faced the world, right? And we all kind of led like that. Well, in 2021, I began to say, okay, we're done circling the wagons. We're moving out to the promised land. Let's go to the frontier and we're going to make this thing happen. And I think we did. I really was pleased with 2021, but I popularized in our leadership team a statement at the beginning of 2021. And I said, hey, today is the best day you're going to feel about this direction, this change for the next 365 days. And we would laugh and we feel good about it. Well, I thought 2022 was coming and all the changes had been broadcast. And so now it was time to really run and have this hum and this just feeling of, wow. So this was what the difficulty of 2021 was. And the leadership miscalculation is that change takes longer and costs more than you ever anticipated. The leadership miscalculation is that while people said it and began to repeat it, actually doing it is different than saying it and repeating it. And I've found that in 2022, that the changes that we begin to broadcast and popularize and cast vision for now 18, 24 months, really is now requiring more than language change. It's requiring behavioral change. And it's much harder to change behavior than it is language. Leaders, listen to that.
Yes.
It is much harder to change behavior than it is language. And Becky, you and I are getting to lead in some behavior change time.
Yes, there is. And that really is a reflection. I mean, John talks about disciplines all the time. Mark lives those disciplines every day. But I think that's where you go from even just behavior to those habits and disciplines, is that phrase that he talks about, inside out instead of outside in. It's easy to just repeat in one of our leadership meetings everything that Mark says, but to actually have that reflected in our language, our attitude, our culture, I think that's maybe the gauge that we start to look for as far as that inside out.
It is. You know, I'm intrigued. So John, he has so many good points in 2 and 3, but Becky, you just said something that sparked me to go to this remove barriers comment that John said. And I want to camp out here with you a little bit here because of what we're doing with Clear. Now, podcast listeners, podcast viewers, I hope you're viewing in today and getting to see Becky and I visually with our podcast. But I'm going to tell you how to get engaged with the clear growth strategy, the clear leadership trajectory that we want you on. And we'll explain all that in a little bit. Becky's running that, doing a phenomenal job. But I want to go from a content standpoint and talk about you and I and our leadership as we're building this. Now, let me be really clear with everybody. This is not a change in that John Maxwell has now written 86 books. He's given 12,000 plus speeches, and he says that every speech and every book can be synthesized to 5 categories: communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, and relationship. Communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, relationship. Clear. CLEAR. And so Becky and I have tasked ourselves to create a clear growth trajectory for any and everybody that will partner with us, and that will lead to a clear leadership enhancement for everyone that takes the journey with us. So we're on a clear growth and clear leadership passion. Becky, we think about it every day. We eat, sleep, dream. It keeps us up. It wakes us up. It's clear as on the brain. But the leadership ecosystem and the barriers to get that have been daunting, right?
Absolutely. It's easier said than done.
It is, and it's not because of a lack of vision. It's not because of a lack of excitement around a direction that will help a lot more people than we've ever helped before. It is because of the changes that are going to be required of us and the barriers to those changes.
Absolutely.
I want you to talk just a minute as a leader, and I'm almost flipping hats for a minute and going to interview you for 1 second here and go, talk to me. You've led it massive. You've led bigger revenues than we're leading right now. Talk to us a little bit about that leader that comes in and can see all those barriers and the level of challenge that presents to someone that's tasked with bringing about the change.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect in leadership of being capable of painting a vision. And that vision has to be wide enough that everyone that you're talking to can attach themselves to it. And as we've all experienced, it's not something you can paint just once. It's a conversation that goes on and on and on. And there's always clarifying moments to bring people back around to make sure we're all on the right track. You know, I remember a very clear conversation you and I had about clear. It's hard to get away from that, by the way. Clear,
That's right.
Clear. But in that conversation, we talked about how we knew there were going to be growing pains And again, it's easy to say that up front, and it's a little different when you start to experience them and then start removing barriers the way that Mark has with our Clear program. But there was a very real conversation where I had said, you realize some people are not going to see the vision that we see, or it's not where they want to go. And I remember when you said, you know what, Becky, in leadership, I'm going to open the doors to the train. I'm going to invite everyone in. I'm going to tell them this euphoric place that we're going and how they can be a part of it. But whether they get on board or not is completely up to them. And I think we've seen a little bit of that.
Yeah. You know, it reminds me, Becky, and I'm so glad you're co-hosting with me today on this particular one, because the peak, the summit that we're chasing is the biggest summit that I've ever chased, taking John's legacy to this popularized message of clear growth and clear leadership. When I share, I'll never forget a year or so ago sharing with John the vision of clear. And John just weeping and saying, you were on that plane, actually, Becky, and John weeping and saying, you guys now have a vision that is bigger than anything we've done before. And then John coming on and getting exciting and saying, this is the right vision. And all of that was fun. And then sharing it with the team was fun. But you know what's not fun is a meeting you and I had just a few weeks ago when we realized that even after 12 months, we are still uncovering barriers. And I sat you and our COO, Matt, down in a meeting, just the three of us. And I said, okay, Becky, I want to know the barriers. I want to know the people barriers. I want to know the marketing barriers. I want to know the performance barriers. I want to know the lack of clarity barriers. Talk to me about the barriers in your life. And here's the teaching point, podcast family, because this almost feels like therapy between Becky and I, and y'all just showed up.
And
to be
it kind
honest
of
with you.
is, actually.
It's like this little bit of therapy going on with Becky and I, but all of the rest of you are just kind of listening. I tell you, of all the lessons John does, there's so many of them where I feel the same way I feel today. He practices what he teaches. He is a practitioner. I have sat on planes. I have been in probably more hotels, been in more cities around the world with John, in every kind of setting, every kind of environment. And I can tell you this, he believes in the power of sustained thinking. He believes that thinking has changed his life, and we believe thinking will change your life. I'm so glad, Tracy, that you're back. I'm reminded today, coming out of John's lesson, of Voltaire's quote. It says, no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. I love that statement. I don't know if it's the word assault, which is like, I want to go after accomplishing something big, but I love that truly with thinking, we can make a difference. And with sustained thinking, we can change many of the things in our life. So Tracy, welcome back. Glad you're on the podcast. What a great lesson, right?
This is a great lesson, and I think it is going to detangle a lot of people from negative thinking, patterns of thinking. I know it did for me. The first time I heard John talk about this, it was like, and if you can't see me, if you're just listening, I'm like showing my head exploding. This was like mind-boggling, because I thought there were either positive thinkers and positive thoughts and positive beliefs, and then there were negative thinkers and negative thoughts and negative beliefs. I guess I just had to learn that I really could control what I thought about based on what I nurtured. And when John talked about, our thoughts really inform our beliefs. Like what we believe is what we spend time thinking about. So if we have spent time thinking something for a long time about ourselves, maybe we've come into agreement with something that someone told us when we were young over and over and over again. And we are just in the habit of saying, I'm this, I do this, this is how I am. And that we've come into agreement with that, so we believe it now. And we can actually go back and say, well, we are that way because that's how we thought about ourselves. And so now we believe it. But if we now think a different way, we can believe something else about ourselves, and then we'll act differently. That really was mind blowing for me, because in my 20s, even in my 30s, and even now in my 50s, there are still things that I am assessing. What do I think about that? that informs my belief. And so, Mark, I'm curious about you, kind of looking back at your 20s and then honestly now in your 50s, a very, very young
Yes, thank
50s.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So in your 20s, clearly, like, were you somebody who had to detangle from what you thought about yourself in your 20s, that you had to change the way you thought about yourself to change your beliefs about yourself? And now in your 50s, even in this role now, are you still having to practice exercises of what you think about yourself in this new position, in this new huge role that you are carrying now in Maxwell Leadership, of carrying his life work into the next generation of leaders? It is so awesome, but it's also a huge responsibility. Are you still 50-something-year-old you having to work on your thoughts to inform a new belief about you?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely. It's interesting, and I hope this part of our podcast will be helpful to many. I wish I knew a little bit more of the science behind the paradigms that we have and the impressions that we receive when we're up to 5, 6, 7, 8. Science tells us that most of our thinking, our personality, is created in those formative years, and then the rest of our life, we spend building on those paradigms, or we spend trying to debunk them. And it's probably yes and for both of those, that we really go back to. I know for me, I grew up in a very generous, very people servant environment. And there are times that I need to be thinking about the future and leading, as John Maxwell talks about. And I go back to wanting to win a popularity contest, rather than wanting to win a productivity contest.
Yeah.
And I go back to that people-pleasing concept that I think was impressioned upon me early on. That's good and bad. It's neither one. And to be honest with you, it is what it is. So to answer your question about leading in my 20s and leading in my 50s, yes, I am constantly trying to rework my thoughts for today's challenges. Isn't that true for us that are now leading past COVID? It was alarming in late 2020, the number of CEOs and top executives that was leaving corporate communities around the world, specifically in America. I mean, I think I saw a stat one time that over 1,700 of the Fortune 5,000 companies changed top senior leadership in the first 6 to 18 months of COVID. Wow. And it's staggering because it was causing us to have to rethink how we do business, how we motivate people. Well, then there's others of us, many of you listening to the podcast now, to where you were leading before COVID, you led through COVID, you're leading after COVID. And I have to tell you, even today, just before coming into studio, I was having to rethink leadership post-pandemic, post-COVID, because we now are leading different. We now think different. The social interaction of people has been shaped by 2 years of a pandemic. So yes is your short answer, Tracy, to say I am rethinking leadership. Between my 20s and 50s, I'm thinking differently. Between being the CEO and now the owner/CEO, I'm thinking different. By the way, I'm having to think different today than I did yesterday. I think this evolving of thinking is a reality, and I think we've got to evolve even faster than any of our predecessors had to evolve. Here is the biggest thing, Tracy, that hit me. John's first point was everything begins with a thought. Everything begins with a thought. Mm-hmm. And I wrote down on my notes as I'm listening to John teach. I hope all of you listening and watching the podcast do the same thing. I wrote down this question: do I spend consistent time, and do I spend enough time thinking? If everything begins with a thought, everybody just stop what you're doing. If you're running on a treadmill, jump off real quick. If you're driving down the road, pull over real quick, because I got a question for you. If everything begins with a thought, when's the last time you've had focused think time in your schedule? We focus on health. I love it. We focus on relationship. I love it. We focus on the next meeting coming up, and thank you for preparing. We all appreciate it. but are you preparing your future? Are you preparing the envisioned and excitable future of yours by focused thought time? I'm going to tell you, as I asked myself that question while John was teaching, I was not really excited about some of my answer there, and determined after this podcast to do better about scheduling think time.
I'm taking notes as you say that, because I'm thinking this is an action-packed world.
Yeah.
And we even in Maxwell Leadership talk so much on this podcast about being action-oriented. And so many of us pause too long and we wait too long to jump into the leadership game. But at the same time, you know, that what Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that he gave, life consists of what a man is thinking about all day. There is a running narrative in all of our minds that is playing and that we are listening to without even really thinking about. And so are we making thinking time a priority? And if we are or aren't, are we thinking that's inactivity? Are we thinking are we just really taking the time to spend time thinking? Because what we are thinking about determines his next line, who we are. And so I just want to say to our listeners, if you are a parent, there is, Mark just said, and I wrote the note, what he said, because it was powerful. He said his thinking is constantly evolving, but there are some things that are timeless, that don't evolve. There are very few things that don't evolve, principles and laws of leadership. But then a lot of the styles and the way that we operate in those laws, those principles and laws, those are moving all the time in how we apply them. But there are some things that don't change. But with social media, they're kind of playing with the laws. They play with the things that aren't supposed to kind of move, some in some spaces. And so as parents, it's really important that we don't keep so active in busy work that we don't forget to monitor because our thinking determines what we believe, what our kids are listening to. Because John said, what we think determines who we are, and who we are determines what we do. So if our kids are listening to all this crazy wild array of different people, it means who we listen to matters. Because if what we listen to determines what we think, and what we think determines who we are and what we believe, we need to be really careful about who our kids and who we are listening to. And so I just want to say hats off to you, for those of you, so many of you who say, my kids, we listen to this podcast together on our way to school. We listen to this podcast while we're commuting home from work and school and daycare and whatever. This is playing in the car. This is playing in our home. I love that, because it's starting so young.
Yeah, as you were talking there, I went to that point that John made. What we think determines who we are. I was recently with John traveling, and I asked him, he had a big speaking day the next day. They had changed a last minute request on what they wanted to communicate, and it needed to be fresh. And we had this full day planned to where we were very busy. And I watched John be fully in the moment. He was just in the moment. And I said, John, if I had your load tomorrow, and if I had a new idea in front of new people that I had to communicate tomorrow, it would be constantly on my mind now. I don't know how to get my thinking under control to be present in the moment and yet be aware that tomorrow is a moment that people are depending on me to be prepared. And I said, how do you do it? And we talked for a few minutes about it, and it was wonderful. That night at dinner, as he does often, he come loaded with bear to answer my question and spoke into me in a way. I won't take this podcast time to talk about that conversation, but I will, because it will go down in one of the top 5 conversations I've ever had with John. Both of us in tears. He saw deep into my heart that night, because I was real vulnerable with him, saying, my thinking is still like it used to be, that I have to perform tomorrow for these people, rather than taking in the moment of today and sharing from today what tomorrow looks like. I wanted to share from preparation rather than experience. And John said, do you not know that you will connect with people greater when you are in the moment of your experience more than you are in the moment of your preparation? And Tracy, I sit there and I just went, man, I want to be synonymous with my thoughts. And then as soon as that word comes out of my mouth, guys, I go, oh, no, I don't. I don't like some of the negative thinking that I have to get control of to then live my life. And yet John is saying, whether you know it or not, leadership, podcast listeners, whether you know it or not, viewers, you are the sum of your thoughts. It is your thoughts are showing up in your behaviors, and most of us don't even know it. And then John began to communicate what he saw in me, and he said, Mark, what I see in you very rarely comes out in what you see in yourself. And he said, it's not because it's not true, it's because you are thinking incorrectly, and that's what's coming out of your mouth rather than what is. Tracy, it was brilliant in the need for us to get our thoughts in line with who we want to be, because whether we like it or not, we're going to be affected by our thinking.
And that shows, boy, that really spoke to me too, because it shows that we are always, that narrative that's talking inside, that sometimes it's negative and we're having to fight against it. And so when John said getting lost in the experience rather than in your preparation, the more preparation we do, spending time in our thoughts, and that preparation will show up when you're present in that experience. Whereas if you hadn't done the preparation, the experience might have been a little more tainted because you hadn't processed through your natural thoughts that you don't want to live in. And so I love that. I hope that comes up again, and that you can dive a little bit more deeper in. And you know, John always talks about layered learning. I hope that you can bring that up again and dive in a little bit more for us, because I know for me, that's a great lesson.
Let me do that at your invitation right now, because on point number four, John says people who go to the top think differently than others.
Right.
Now, I know that my ascent to promotion in John Maxwell's organization, I know I was constantly going, I can get that done. I can do that. I would look at the people around me and I would go, I can do that. I feel like I can do that a little better. Not to be better than them, but I can learn from them and produce better because I'm in a state of learning. Right. And there was this constant assessment that I would do about production, discipline, work ethic, that on the trajectory, on the journey to the summit, caused me to think more positively than being on the summit and either deserving it or staying on the summit.
Yes.
So leaders, here is the point. We absolutely need to think differently as we move through life. It goes back to Tracy's first point. Do we need to be different in our thinkers? Do we think different as a 50-year-old than a 20-year-old? Yes, 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 yes. Do I think differently today rather than I did 2 years ago? Yes, 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 yes. But if the difference is an outlook, like if you get to the top of your game and then start looking over your shoulder or behind your back in fear, when all you did in the ascent was look forward in positivity and absolute belief that you could do it, you've changed the perspective, and you're not a negative person, but you've become negative because your thinking has changed based on your position of success.
Yes.
And what John is saying before he goes to the last point that we can change our thinking is this. People who get to the top think differently than others. Here's what that means. Do you believe you can get to the top? I hope your answer is yes. We're putting a lot of podcasts. We're over 19 million downloads now. We're getting ready to get close to our 200th episode. I hope we have helped you believe you can get to the top. Here's my other question. Do you believe when you get to the top, you'll see the next summit, or do you think that's the finish line? That's a thought. Do you think when you get to the top, now all everybody wants to do is to pull you down to the bottom? That's a way of thinking. It's incredibly important that we do adapt our thoughts, but it's just as important that we don't shape our attitude to be different just because we have arrived or we believe we can never arrive. And that attitude with which our thoughts are formed on is so important to leaders. And if we don't believe we'll ever get to the top, there's a 99% chance you'll never get to the top, because your thoughts shape who you are. But if we get to the top and all of a sudden we now change our attitude from one of gratitude or hunger and now one of entitlement and satisfaction, we've changed the whole foundation of our thought process, and we don't even understand that we've lost our effectiveness because our best days are behind us. And so, Tracy, I want to go back, and I do want to wrap it up, although I don't want to wrap it up. I never want to wrap it up. I want to go back to this concept that we can change the way we think. And first, I want to hear you just give a little thoughts on what you took away from John in that, because he taught a lot more after he made that point. And then maybe a way or two that you change your thinking, because I'm trying to learn right here, because there's some areas in full candor, which I always try to do that with these podcasts is full candor. I need to change my thinking in some areas. And so how do we do this? How do we do this change your thinking?
Well,
Commitment,
two things I'll say quickly. The first thing that he said really connected with me. And if you are somebody who is an empathetic person and an emotional person that's dealing with your emotions and your thinking, he said the number one challenge to thinking is going to be your feelings. Yeah. So if that really connected for you, then John is also an emotional person. I know Mark also has an emotional person that we're also trying to combat as we're trying to think our way through this. So John has given a tool that I think is so powerful. When you are dealing with a situation, he will say, you want to separate all of the parts of you. And you do that by asking yourself, what do I think? What do I feel? What do I know? And then what do I do? Because your brain kind of categorizes it all in the mush of you as what you know. So what you feel, you categorize as what you know. And so that's kind of like sorting out all of those things into different categories really does help you identify, what do I think about this? What do I feel about this? So that's two different things. What do I know is true? And you find that what you know is really a lot less because you feel a lot of more things than what you actually know in the situation. And then what should I do? Because he said, thoughts are a taxi. You get in and they take you where you want to go. And guess what, friends? If you are sitting in a taxi and you are stewing and brewing and having bad thoughts and you are believing things that you don't really know and you're identifying your feelings and your thoughts with beliefs, it was what you know, but you know, oh my goodness, this is actually just a feeling and I don't really know. Get out of that taxi and hail yourself another taxi. Yes. Bring in a new thought and bring in a new belief. And so that's kind of what I have taken John's advice to really try to work through that so that I can put on healthy thinking.
Well, and it's interesting that John said his first book, he said this in his teaching today, his first book back in 1989 was Think on These Things. You think about a life's work of 86 unique books, 119 derivatives of those 86 books. You think of 36 million hands have held a John Maxwell book. And you go, wow, all that started with the concept that you need to think differently to be successful. You need to think differently to make it about others. Think about that. Life's work began with this idea, think on these things. I went back, and Jake, thanks for providing this. Albert Einstein's quote, try not to become a person of success, rather become a person of value. And I love that, Tracy, because, and I'm going to take a couple of minutes here, because I really resonate with John's lesson today, and I love how he shared it's a risky statement. When I first heard it, I was like, success is for everyone. And I made a joke here. Success all around. I'm buying success today. Let me spread it around. And we kind of laughed about that. Yep. But then as I heard John teach, I went back to my story. And I went back to a story that perhaps those of you that listen to the podcast, you're very familiar with. I truly joined John Maxwell's team on May 1st of the year 2000. Bankrupt relationally, bankrupt financially. I wasn't giving any money. I wasn't making any money. I had no generosity in me. I think I still had a spirit, an attitude of generosity, but I had very little. I didn't bring any relational equity to the table. Nobody gave me a great reference that got me in the door. I had to introduce myself to every soul on the team because nobody knew me. In other words, I walked into an environment and I didn't bring very much. And now look what this environment has given me. I've went from the stock room to now getting to co-own things with John, be the CEO for the last 12 years. And I did a lesson recently that just underscores that I do believe this lesson, success is for everyone. I did a lesson with several thousand of our coaches, our Maxwell Leadership Certified coaches. And this was the lesson title, If It Can Happen to Me, It Can Happen to You. If I can do what I am doing today with as little as I brought to the table, then success can happen for you too. And I believe it's wrapped in these components of knowing your purpose in life, growing to your maximum potential, sowing seeds that benefit others. And Tracy, I know you have a story of extreme success. What I want to do here in this podcast is, one, make it believable. Success is for you. Success is for you. The second thing I want to make sure that we don't do is create a success gap. Tracy and I are at a perceived successful place in our life, and I don't want that to make success feel out of reach for you. Go back to the core definitions that John's given us. Apply that to you and begin, as Albert Einstein said, begin that journey of adding value, and success will follow. And so I sounded like I just closed the podcast right there, Tracy, and I really didn't. But that was so on my heart. I was like, I really want to get this out, because if it can happen to me, Mark Cole, I promise you it can happen for you too.
And I totally agree. And I love this lesson because it is both of our stories. And I feel like we can sometimes become numb to people who are in a perceived position of success and think something magical happened for them or whatever. And really, it's just consistent, unseen steps that have been taken in a certain direction in the areas that John talks about here. Because I'm the same way. When I first found John, I was 21 years old. I had not been to college. I was seeking out John because I wanted to grow, and I heard he was the guy to learn from. And so in these same 3 areas, and I even broke them down into even 4, because he says success is knowing my purpose in life, growing to my maximum potential, and sowing seeds that benefit others. But here's how I hear it. When I first came to John, I thought he was going to teach me, Mark, I don't know what I thought he was going to teach me. Things I didn't know, things I couldn't even title, And what I heard was, number 1, I need to discover my purpose. Number 2, intentionally grow every day. Number 3, practice generosity. And number 4, add value to people. Guess what? I could do all 4 of those at 21 years old without $1 to my name. And probably that day I did not have $1 to my name. And so I love that, because every single person, no matter what level of success you have today, as you're listening to this podcast, that you can do those 4 things today, no matter what age or stage you're in life today. And I love that so much.
Well, and going to that, I'm going to give a shout out to our intern, Kyle Reisig, that's in studio with us today. He's just come and helping us for a period of time in between classes at college. And Kyle was asking, I love this, an intern that is asking questions his very first week. He's not soaking it all in. He's engaging. He was asking me a demographic question of our podcast listeners. And then I gave him kind of what age demographic information that we have in our world. And he said, let me tell you this. More of the students that I participate with, that I go to school with, needs to hear what I'm hearing in studio today. He said, we've got to figure out a way to get this podcast into the next generation, into the college age kids, into the high school kids. And his point is because this will help us, he's in that age group, this will help us set the courses in life that will make decisions that will lead us to a greater life of success and definitely a greater life of significance. And then, Tracy, you come out of this talk and say, hey, for me, it was 21 years old. I was at this shaping age, this age to where I wanted to figure out what I was going to do when I grow up. And that's where you begin to set your course on these 4 attributes that you just shared. Love that.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me just say something before we aren't even to our first point yet, but let me just say yesterday I was in the kitchen with my 16-year-old son. And I was making pasta, and he, you know how it goes with teenagers. The conversations just pop up when you're just doing regular life things. And it turned into a conversation very similar to this one, where he was trying to figure out something in his life, and he was processing it all in his own head. And he had said he had talked to some of his friends about it. And I had just said, like, buddy, you know what? This is the value of parents. It's not just to process it through your head, or other kids who are at your stage of life who can only see from 16 years old and less. Go higher. That's what the value of parents is. Talk to us and help us see, like, processing through maybe, you know, how you can add value in a different way and get your eyes off of yourself. I love this statement. That it's not that you should be thinking of less of yourself, but think of yourself less. That's generosity. And so don't think less of yourself. I don't want you to think less of yourself, but sometimes we need to think of ourselves less and look at other people. And that's when we really start to get in this first point is, how do I know my purpose in life? And I feel like there are podcast listeners, because I know this was me too. And so I know you can relate to this. I don't know if this was you, Mark, but I just didn't know my purpose in life for a while. I felt like it was this big, huge, abstract thing. And so I just started growing and trying to be generous in spirit. I didn't have a lot of money to be generous with, but I tried to be generous in spirit with my time. I started to be generous with the way that I spent my time with people. And the more I did that, the more I discovered my purpose. And so do you have any advice for people who are at that place where they want to dive into growth, but they don't really know their purpose yet? That age group, kind of what you were talking about, might not know their purpose yet.
Well, it's so funny as you were saying that. I number one, I'm going to question 1 and question 2 right here about how do I maximize my potential, which is where he talked about growth, Tracy. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting here and you're going, yeah, for a while I didn't know my purpose. I'll be honest with you. It wasn't until 31 that I even knew I was supposed to know my purpose. It wasn't until about 32 or 33 before I realized, hey, I've got a purpose too. And then it was a little bit later than that when I could state my purpose. So let's be really clear. People like Kyle in the studio today, Javon, all these young men and women that I get to interact with that's seeking purposeful things, I'm going, you guys have no idea. You're a decade, if not more, ahead of me. Yeah, because I'm 30 years old, bebopping along, joining John Maxwell's team as an entry level. And somebody said, what's your growth plan? And I went, I don't know. And then they said, well, what's your purpose? And I went, purpose? To wake up, to eat, to find somebody that likes me? I mean, this purpose question was so much bigger than me. Right. And so now let me tell you why I've got to link question, how do I know my purpose? And then 2, how do I grow to my maximum potential together? Mm-hmm. I have to do that. Because it was as I began to chart my course for growth that I began to realize my potential in life. Mm-hmm. I don't believe, based on my life, I spent 30 years living out a purpose, but guess what? It was everybody else's purpose for me. Yes. It wasn't my purpose. Yeah. And when you, young person, live a life, choose a career, and choose a relationship because everybody else in your life is pleased with that but you're on a train wreck. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of time. That's right. Because the purpose has got to resonate within you deeper, that when all odds are stacked against you, you still chase your purpose. When everybody says, no, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard, you still go after it. That's what a real purpose is. It is defiable against all odds and against all affirmation and confirmation of those around you. Mm-hmm. So for 30 years, Tracy, I lived on purpose. It was just somebody else's purpose. It wasn't mine. Right. Well, my life train wrecked. Mm-hmm. And then I began to realize that I didn't need to just have a purpose. I needed to have my purpose. Mm-hmm. And when I began an intentional path of growth each and every year, for 3 years, I just grew myself. I intentionally pursued growth. And in that intentional pursuit, I'll never forget it, the end of 2002, in a cabin in Blue Ridge, Georgia, I'm reviewing how I've grown the last 2 years. I'm setting the course of how I want to grow the next year. And boom, it clarified for me what my purpose was.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you what that is because we're talking about it, and perhaps some of you are new podcast listeners and haven't heard it. It's not going to sound that profound to you, but to me, it's everything. My life exists to inspire and motivate people to help them reach their full potential. You know why I woke up this morning and didn't stay in bed? Because my life exists to inspire other people. I saw the podcast on my schedule this morning and I went, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that today. Yeah. I know some things I've got to do this afternoon that are a little difficult. They're not in my strength zone. They're not in my skill set. To be honest with you, they're not in my appetite for my agenda. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do them. You know why? Because I exist to multiply, inspire, motivate, and inspire people to reach their full potential. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing it because my parents, my relationships, others around me want to do it. I'm doing it because it is what wakes me up in the morning. It's what keeps me up at night. And that was found by answering these questions. What is my desire? What are my talents? What are my opportunities? And I found answers to those questions by growing myself, surrounding myself in a growth environment, and writing out a plan for personal growth. For me, Tracy, the answer for those two questions were so symbiotic that I can't separate them in the answering.
And you know how, let me just tell those of you who are listening and you're aligning what Mark's saying up to your own life and you're trying to think, does that fit for me? Does that fit with what my personal life purpose is? And I would just say to you, when you are in that zone and you are growing in that zone, it is going to be, you will have hard times. It's not like it's just all smooth sailing when you're growing in your sweet spot and in your purpose. But there will be times when you'll feel like your hair's on fire. You're so outside of your comfort zone. But you will also at the same time feel so deeply fulfilled. So like Mark said, called out of bed in the morning. Sometimes I wake up at 3:30 in the morning and I check my phone on my night table. I'll turn it over and I'll see like what time it is. And I think, is it too early to get up yet? Yeah, my body probably, I know what I need to do today, and I probably need a little bit more sleep, but sometimes I'm so excited to get into my day. I remember my mom saying that. Like, I look forward to waking up in the morning because I can't wait to get into my day and what I do. That is somebody who is driven by purpose and every day getting up to do your purpose, so that while you might have days where you feel stressed or you might feel out of your zone or like your hair's on fire because you're so uncomfortable because you're out of your comfort zone, you're still your heart's on fire. You're excited to get up and get into it. And when you are in a growth environment where other people are in that same space, it even pulls you deeper. What's that quote? I'm going to misquote it, but John always says, like, when you are out of, when you're in the deep waters, it doesn't matter how deep you are. It's like once you go out of the shallow zone, it doesn't matter how deep the water is. Just keep going.
He also says, Tracy, he says that he doesn't wake up out of discipline. He wakes up out of anticipation.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, for me, that happened as I began to discover the return on personal growth and the clarity of a personal vision and purpose statement. And that anticipation, and that's what I really want you to have at the end of this, is this pursuit for growth, this pursuit for clarity in your purpose. Success will come with those things.
That's exactly right. And another thing I'd like to touch on, and I know this is something that's important to you, is practicing generosity. Yeah. And this is something that John does, I think, perhaps better than anyone. I mean, that's why he's a mentor to both of us. I am drawn in by John's generosity. He is just such a generous human being. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about his spirit of generosity. When you are around John, you just feel his care, his concern for you. You can tell he's prepared. He's looked forward. He's anticipated spending time with you. And that is something that, to me, draws me in. And I want to be like that. I want to make other people feel the way I feel when I'm with John, because he is so generous in his spirit. Can you talk a little bit about generosity and what that looks like for you in your leadership and in your personal life?
Yeah, and I can give you a funny story that just happened this past weekend. We're recording this now, and John and I were just traveling together. And and so this all backs up John's statement that I want us all to get, and I will tell you the story. But he said generosity is not a bank account. It is an attitude. And so many people think that when they reach a certain earning threshold, or when they pay off their car, their house, or when I start making real money, for all you college students out there listening, I'll start being generous then. Yeah, maybe. But it won't be because you got money. It'll be because you got an attitude of generosity. There's a big difference in a big bank account and people that have no generosity, and a small bank account with people that are abundant at everything that they do. John this week, and John's really taught me to, by standards, over-tip, over-express appreciation to those that are in the service industry. And so we were at a really nice hotel this past week, and the guy helped us with our luggage. He helped us with this. He did a lot of great things. And so I gave him a very generous, like, John Maxwell inspired tip. I mean, I gave him like a really nice tip for what he had helped me with that day. And the guy was just blown away. He said, Mr. Cole, thank you. We came down one day later. Mr. Cole, thank you. We came down the next day. And he said, Mr. Cole, you've just been so good, so nice. Thank you very much. Well, then I watched John slip over behind the car and slip him what I knew was a $100 bill. And he got back in the car, and I said, he remembered your name too. Why are you trying to get him to quit being so appreciative to me? He said, Mark, it just struck me. This is him. This is him. And I cut up with him, and we had this crazy sense of humor. But I was acting like he was trying to trump me and being more generous, you know. Out-tip me and get more affirmation from the guy that was serving us with our luggage and all that. And I said, John, why'd you just out-tip me? And he said, anybody that appreciates something so much as he did the first day we got here probably has a need, Mark, bigger than you and I could imagine. And I just felt compelled that I needed to go double and triple what you had done for a guy that was showing that much generosity. And I went, golly, what a brilliant, I mean, I'm not making this just happened. What a brilliant attitude of generosity. John goes, man, this guy is so grateful. I bet you a little bit more generosity would go a long way in this young man's life. Because we're in a city that has truly been shut down until recently. If he's dependent on tips, he's probably accumulated a lot of bills. And my relatively generous tip to him inspired John to a greater letter of generosity, not because he wanted to outgive, not because he has a big bank account, but because he has a heart, a spirit of generosity. And Tracy, you said it at the beginning, and we're speaking in John's absence here, but I've never experienced the level of generosity that I see on a daily basis with John Maxwell, and I want to experience that.
I do too. And we can all start practicing that now. Even if you don't have money, the resources financially, you can start with your time. You can start with being generous with love and kindness toward people. That, you know, not everybody's kind to people, especially, gosh, you just go out. There's a lot of angst with people right now because of those bills, because people haven't been able to work. There's a lot of angst in private lives. And so when you're generous with kindness to people, you can just see how they're taken aback and they're grateful for it. And so imagine if we're giving 2 and 3 times more generosity and kindness towards people, right, how that's going to be. I'll toss it back to you, but the last thing that I really want to share with people is the other day when I had a phone call with John, I would just want to share with our audience what he shared with me because it was greatly impactful for me and I wrote it down. And he said to me, Tracy, I have found that most people do better when they're believed in. He said, wow. I do better when people believe in me. And I've just found that most people do better when people believe in them. And he said, so I want to believe in people so that they can do better. And I thought that's a generosity again, but it's also valuing people. And what a lesson. And so I share it with you because it's impacted me. And that private conversation, I'm sure he said it to many people too, but I share it with all of our listeners because what a beautiful lesson.
Yeah, you know, it's how successful people think. I mean, you're sitting here and we're truly, rightly so, taking a lot of time talking about success, but showing you how success is really all about others. It's really about significance. And we're taking a lot of time here at the end of this to show you how successful people think. And you don't gain success and then all of a sudden start thinking. You think your way along until you see that level of success. And so John wrote a book, How Successful People Think. In fact, Jake, I'd like to make that available to everybody. Let's put it in our show notes. We'll put a link. You go to that link, put in a promo code podcast, and we'll give you 15% off of this book, How Successful People Think. I want to give you that next step because listening to this podcast is one thing, but getting into your awareness, how you should be thinking, is truly one of the first and major steps on your way to a successful life, on a way to successful decisions and processing life from a successful perspective. So I want you to take that book and get it because, again, we're talking about generosity. We're talking about John. You quoted John, gave us an experience of John, Tracy. There is this unbelievable sense of fulfillment that will come to you as you realize that your life has substance, that your life has significance, that your life is successful. And we want you to have that here. That's our passion. I love to share a podcast comment from a listener that said, this is actually from Lena. Lena also, a few weeks ago, I referenced somebody from episode 200. It was a good lesson. We want you to listen to that. We'll put it in the show notes. But Lena was listening to episode 200. And she said, hey, thank you so much for the link to the 21 laws. I've been listening to this podcast while posting payroll every Wednesday. And I've been doing this every morning for the last 3 years. I can't begin to count how many changes, small and big, I have made in the last 3 years that has been directly influenced by the podcast. Thank you and good work.
But one of the first things he said was when he dove into environment. I feel like there is so much meat there. And one of the first things he said was that leaders do what leaders experience together. And one of the things that I remember John always saying is that you can't transfer the emotion, the lessons, everything that you have and you experience when you go somewhere and you try to bring it back to your team. And anybody who has ever gone anywhere and they've experienced something so powerful, you try to come back and you tell it to someone and it's like, you just can't transfer it. And so can you talk a little bit about the value of those experiences and that environment, and how do you bring your team with you to experience that so you don't have to come back and try to explain it to them?
I love this part of this lesson, Tracy, because, and I love what you just said. When you've been given a lot is required. John's often talked about the leadership bubble. We've seen people, I've been with John now for 22 years, and I've seen people come in, and I've seen people excel. I've seen people leave, and I've seen them almost go back to where they were before they ever joined John Maxwell's team. And that was perplexing to me. You know, how can you excel as such a great leader, then you go try something new, and it's harder than you thought? And I don't take great joy or pride in that people are very successful here and then not as successful other places, because I've seen the exact opposite too. People be very successful in John's organization, leave for one reason or another, and then go be very successful. But I think what John is teaching right here on environment, that there does exist in all of us. There is a leadership bubble. There's a learning bubble. There is a relationship bubble. We can get into environments that actually make us look bigger, better, and more effective than perhaps we would be in another environment.
John gives us 4 very powerful questions at the end of this lesson. And one of them kind of struck me, and I want to get your feedback on this, because he said, hey, if the individual that has a difficult personality, which, by the way, is probably just opposite of yours, so it's just a different, not a difficult, we should look at it that way. He says, you got to have yeses, okay, to these, in all 4 of these questions. One of them, he says, is, will they change? And I was struck by this because I thought, do we want them to change, or do we want to mold them? Do we want to shape them? When you bring people onto the team, and John has done this for so long, and I'm beginning to see you do this, you don't necessarily want them to change. You want them to shift and to mold and to shape. Talk a little bit about your expectations of leaders that are different than you or difficult, and your expectations of them
on whether or not they change as you kind of wrap up for us today?
Yeah. So, man, Chris, once again, I love this podcast. We could go on for a long time, but Jake is throwing eggs at us and rolling us with toilet paper.
Yeah.
Let me say this. Let me define change for a moment.
Okay.
Growth is change. Do I expect anybody, everybody,
That's good.
absolutely
That's good.
anybody, potentially somebody, will somebody change? Yes, because growth is change.
Yeah.
Now, do I expect change? Yes. But here is what you're asking me. Do we want to change the personality or the skill sets or the strengths of the people on our team, or utilize them and set them free to live in their strengths?
That's good.
And the answer is absolutely. I don't want you to change. The one thing I want the world to see is I want them to see how good I see you as a leader. So I don't want Chris, the methodical, the processor, the thinker on our team. I don't have many of you on my leadership team of 11. I don't want to change those attributes of you, those strengths, those skill sets, those personality traits. But do I want you to change in that you know how to communicate those better? You know when to step up and insert yourself? Absolutely.
Yeah,
so
that's
knowing the things that you want to change and the things you don't want to change is part of the art of leadership, not the skill set of leadership, the art of leadership. And so there are things, Chris, yes, that I want to change. There are things that I don't want to change. I want to explode into the world because it's your finest parts, and it's the things that the world will be better because of that.
Love it. Change equals growth.
I love the expression that says it's wonderful when the people believe in the leader, but it's more wonderful when the leader believes in the people. And I wish you could see you as I see you. Because if you could see you as I see you, you would become so excited. Because you would see possibility, you would see transformation, you would see a fresh start, you would see things that would be greatly inspiring. So I want you to look at your neighbor that's at your table and say to them, if you could see me like John Maxwell sees me, you'd ask for my autograph. Would you tell that to your neighbor right now? Go ahead and tell them that. Well, some of you are going to be signing autographs tonight, aren't you, huh? You really are. And what I want you, you say, well, John, what do you see in me? Let me share with you what I see in you. I, first of all, see people that God created for greatness. Most people live way beneath their opportunities and their privileges. And so when I see you, I see you as you are, but I see you as you can be. And what you can be is greater than what you are. In fact, a year from now, you'll have to introduce yourself to yourself. You'll look in the mirror a year from now and you'll say, oh my, you look familiar. Haven't I seen you somewhere? And then you'll have to talk about the fact that during this last year you have grown and you've changed and you've learned. And pretty soon you're going to say, well, I knew you, but I'm not sure I know you. And you're going to have to reintroduce yourself to yourself. And by the way, you're going to have to also reintroduce yourself to people who do know you. Because a year from now, they won't know you. Oh, they'll think they know you, and they'll say, well, yes, I recognize that face. But they won't recognize the change that is within you. Because you won't be the same person. Because you can't be the same when you get into an environment that is conducive for growth. At your table, you have people who want to see you succeed. Isn't it rare to be in a room with people who want to see you succeed? This is a different feel, folks. You see, you come out from among people that are average. And average people want you to stay average. But when you get to the John Maxwell team, we don't want you to stay average. We don't even like average. We think average is average. And we've never known average to change a life. We've never known average to excite someone. We've never known average to provide hope in the future. We've never known average to be something that people wanted to be following and have as a model in their life. We've never known average to be anything but average. And we think because average is average, we in the John Maxwell team can be and should be a cut above average. So we don't like average. And today is the last day you wear the cloak of average. Take it off. Take it off. In fact, we're not going to let you be average. If we see you begin to settle, we're going to slap you silly. We're going to bring you back to your regular senses of how God created you to be. He made you after His own image. He made you for greatness. And let's just have a confession. Most of us are living beneath our opportunities. Isn't that true? So look at the person you're seated beside and say to them, you're living beneath your opportunities. Oh, okay, come on. Wait. Some of you, the way you're talking, they're living way beneath their opportunity. Let's get it back to where I am on the stage. There's a better way to look at it. There's a better way to handle it. There's another level. Are you with me? So what I want you to know is this. We're going to do our very best to create an environment for you to be successful in. We have our part and you have your part. Our part is to love on you, teach you well, connect with you, believe in you, and give you opportunities. I can say with great integrity to you this evening, you cannot join an organization that will have greater opportunities for you to make a difference than the John Maxwell team. I can promise you that. That's not a hype statement. That's not an exaggerated statement. What other organization can you join that has 22 countries wherein the president of those countries has asked you to come in and raise the level of transformation within those countries and teach leadership values? What other organization can you join that has that kind of an opportunity? What kind of an organization can you join that next year will start putting high school curriculum in the hands of high schoolers, and next year it will be 2 million in Latin America, it'll be 3 million in Africa, and within 5 years we'll be up to 50 million high school kids that are getting great leadership values in the classroom? What other organization can offer that to you? And this is where you come in. The opportunities that are before me are staggering. And sometimes I look at them and I just I'm a person of faith. I say, God, they're bigger than me, they're coming faster, and they're beyond me. And God looked down and He saw me and He said, you're right, John. You're over your head. Now let me talk to you about being over your head. When you're over your head, it doesn't matter how deep the water is. You're just over your head. So I said, I've got good news for you, John. It's too much for you. And in His sovereignty, it wasn't in my planning. I wasn't smart enough. In His sovereignty, He said, I'm going to bring to you like-minded people who are going to help you make a difference. One is too small of a number to achieve greatness. And in the laws of teamwork, the law of Mount Everest says, as the challenge escalates, the need for teamwork elevates. In other words, the bigger your challenge, the better your team. So when somebody comes and says, I have a big dream, my first question to them is, Well, do you have a big team? You've got to have a team to match your dream. Let me tell you what a nightmare is. A nightmare is having a number 10 dream and a number 2 team. That's not a dream. That's a nightmare. In fact, you will rise to the level of your dream based upon the level of your team. The dream isn't going to deliver to you what you want. It's the dream team that's going to deliver to you what you want. And that's why I'm so stinking excited. Because I look out at you and God is saying, let me tell you how much I love you, Maxwell. Look who I sent you again. A new army, a new team, a new fresh group of people who want to make a difference, doing something that makes a difference at a time when it makes a difference. And I am so glad you are here. You got here just in time. Where have you been? Look at me. I love you. I believe in you. And I'm going to give you my best. The very best that I have this week. And so will every faculty member. And in a few days, we're going to have you trained and equipped, inspired and resourced, ready to go back into your world and make a difference in the lives of many people.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.